morning, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and welcome back to Law and Crime, where we cover some of the most interesting live trials in the country today. And today we are covering one of those interesting trials, and it's the case out of Ohio, the one that we've been covering constantly this week, the Shawn Grate case, this accused serial killer. He faces a 23-count indictment, and several of those charges are related to the abduction and rape of one woman, as well as the murder of two other women, Elizabeth Griffin, as well as Stacy Hicks. A really brutal crime scene that investigators went to, this house of horrors that I've been calling it. When investigators came there, they saw maggots, decomposed bodies, restraints, and then the most important thing that we saw yesterday was the testimony of Jane Doe. Jane Doe was this woman that was allegedly kidnapped and raped by Mr. Grate, and she provided her testimony to the jurors yesterday. Now, her face wasn't shown, but we heard everything she said. And the first time we ever heard her was actually the 911 phone call that she gave to police when they rescued her and arrested Mr. Grate. So it's a really amazing case to watch. And yesterday the testimony from this witness was really compelling. If you think about this woman, what she went through, I believe it was from Sunday to Tuesday, just a marathon of rape and physical abuse. It can be very difficult to listen to. We have a short report about her testimony from yesterday. I want to play that for you right now.
The surviving victim, who escaped from a suspected serial killer by calling the police while he slept, took the stand. The unidentified victim described how she first met with the defendant, Shawn Grate, who is accused of kidnapping and sexually assaulting her and is charged in connection with the murders of two other women.
What's the problem? I've been abducted. Who abducted you? Shawn Grate. Where's she at now? Asleep.
She claimed Grate was like an older brother to her before he snapped.
So when he started pulling the Bible from my hands, I just looked up like curious, like, what are you doing? And that's when he says, you're not going anywhere. I tried to push him away and get up. I was just doing everything. Trying to kick, punch, but everything I did, he just did it so much harder. I think when I stopped struggling and fighting, he asked me if I had enough, and I think I just remained motionless, and so he released his hands. He started pulling off my clothes.
The victim described the assault she endured at the hands of the defendant.
At some point on the night of the 11th, were you sexually assaulted?
Several times.
How were you assaulted?
In every way imaginable.
Grate faces 23 counts, including aggravated murder and kidnapping. If convicted, he could face the death penalty. For Law and Crime, I'm Rachel Stockman.
Really disturbing stuff hearing about what that young lady went through. We have a live feed in the courtroom. It hasn't started yet. As soon as trial starts, we'll make sure to go live today. We don't want you to miss anything in this case. But there's a lot to break down and think about with this case. So I want to bring in right now defense attorney Richard Tendler. He's joining us via Skype. Richard, great to have you.
Nice to be here, Jesse.
Good to see you. So let's talk a little bit about the Grate case right now. We saw the testimony of Jane Doe yesterday, this survivor. It's interesting to say when you have a survivor in these kinds of cases. A survivor, the victim herself, is speaking. What do you think the jury was thinking when they're listening to this woman, a very religious woman, befriended the defendant, said that he was like her brother, and little did she know that she opened her life up to him, and it ended up with her being kidnapped, sexually abused, physically assaulted. I mean, this is just horrific. What do you think the jury's thinking?
This is as powerful as it gets in a courtroom. Is riveting testimony out of a prosecution witness. That jury hates this defendant at this point. This was as fierce as you could get. It was believable, credible. There was no other way to put it. Devastating for the defense, I would say.
Yeah, and the defense, under cross-examination, tried to, I'm still confused as what they tried to do. It seemed that they tried to say, well, you know, when you first met him, he wasn't so bad. And I don't know what they were trying to get at there. because he's on trial right now for serious charges. So I'm not really sure what more they could have done by cross-examining this witness. I know it gets tricky, cross-examining a victim of sexual abuse. And let alone, right now, we just found out the Bill Cosby verdict. He was guilty on all 3 counts of indecent sexual conduct, and that part, the indecent assault, and there were at least 5 women that came forward, and they had to be cross-examined. So it gets very tricky when you have to cross-examine victims of sexual abuse.
No doubt, it does, and I think what else is the defense supposed to do in this situation? Look, these defense lawyers have a very difficult job. These types of cases are simply about saving this client's life. So this is a marathon for them. They're not looking at this battle here. They're looking at the war overall. One of the things they have to keep in mind is, we're going to move on later to a penalty phase. So it's about saving this guy's life. You don't want to turn a jury off by going off on her. There's not much to say. It's a very difficult job that the defense has right now. It's a tightrope. You kind of feel for them in that, hey, you think, well, they're not doing anything. Why aren't they doing something for this guy? But in actuality, they are. Because, as you said, Jesse, it's walking a very fine line. If they go too far, it's going to turn that jury off. If they don't, if they do anything. So this was devastating testimony. There's not much you could do with it. You just got to take it early on and then hope that the momentum starts to shift later on.
Richard, stand by. There's a lot to talk about with the defense and the defense's strategy. We expect closings a week from Monday, and that seems to be for the first part of the trial. Remember, it's bifurcated. The jury first has to determine guilt or innocence in terms of what he's charged with, and then they move on to those sexual predator specifications, and we'll get into that in a minute. We'll talk about what the defense's strategy is overall, but what I want to play for you right now, again, this is some of more of the testimony from Jane Doe from yesterday. I know it's difficult to listen to, but it's important to listen to nonetheless. So here's some testimony from her from yesterday. You're watching the testimony from Jane Doe from yesterday, the woman that was kidnapped and raped allegedly by Shawn Grate, and that's what he's on trial for, as well as a plethora of different other counts, including murder, burglary, rape. It's a horrific case, and you're hearing the words from the victim herself. Never an easy thing to hear, but also never an easy thing to do if you're her testifying in front of the world. Again, I want to bring in defense attorney Richard Tendler. Richard, we talked about earlier that this case is bifurcated. So we believe, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, that's a live feed into the courtroom right there. So as soon as we have audio, as soon as the next witness comes in, we'll make sure to go to it. But Richard, we talked about how this case is bifurcated. So we believe closings will happen a week from Monday. Closings in the guilt or innocence phase. If the jury finds him guilty, then they move on to the second phase, which is the sexually violent predator specification phase. Can you break it down what the jury will ultimately have to decide here?
Well, they're going to have to decide how violent he is, and where they're moving on from there. I mean, it is. They're going to, and that's why the defense at this point now isn't putting on much of a case. Everything's going to be mitigation after this particular phase of the trial. Everything will be in a mitigation phase afterwards, and they will be showing how what he suffered from his childhood, the trauma that he's possibly been through, any previous doctors that have been able to evaluate him, anything of that sort, anything good that he did during his life, anything that potentially mitigates the potential sentence that he receives.
That sounds all well and good, but does it actually work? Have you seen cases where that works?
Well, it can. If it's done skillfully, it absolutely can work. This is, we'll see what these trial lawyers are all about.
Exactly. Richard, stand by. We have another witness about to come onto the stand, so let's listen in.
A million times that he's just got to stop running his mouth. It's not helping at all.
What do you do? What do you do when you're put in that situation? You're forced to defend somebody who's admitted to crimes.
No doubt, no doubt. It's absolutely horrible. You cringe every time. The only thing you can do is try and use it in your favor later on and let the jurors know, hey, look, he's open about it. He knows he has problems. He knows he has issues. There's no reason to put him to death. So maybe somehow or another turning it around later, but no, it's a nightmare for the defense attorneys.
So I've heard this argument before, that the idea that take the defendant's statements, show, for lack of a better word, how mentally unstable he is, how crazy he is. Is that the way to flip it?
It is. I mean, this is what these death penalty cases are all about. They're generally, as the prosecutor said in this case, it's not a whodunit. They're gruesome. The facts are horrible, and your job is to, at some point throughout the mitigation phase of the trial, the penalty phase of the trial, is to draw sympathy and understanding for your client. So if you can do that, you get one juror out there to feel that way, to feel that, hey, give him a life sentence rather than killing him, then you've done your job as a defense attorney.
That may be their overall strategy, and that may be their main strategy. If that's the case, if they're really just worried about saving his life, then why even cross-examine some of these witnesses about what they saw and heard in the first place? Earlier in the week, we saw one of his defense attorneys cross-examining a witness about what she did in fact see. He said, you recognized the defendant from the side of his face? You recognized him from the side of his face? So why even cross-examine the witnesses if that's really not the main focus of their strategy?
I think jurors understand that as a defense attorney, you do have to, be able to show them that you're just doing your job. And perhaps there's legal reasons for, making sure that things don't get admitted into evidence, and you're laying the groundwork for an appeal later on, because chances are there is going to be a death penalty here. So, yeah. And generally, when you move on to the penalty phase, you'll have a different lawyer making those arguments so that they don't do what exactly you're concerned about, Jesse, which is take it out on that lawyer.
Yeah, we've seen that before where it's split up into teams. We'll have to see what happens ultimately here. I think he probably will have the same defense team. We have a live audio back in the courtroom, so let's listen in. All right, everybody. So you're listening to those police interview tapes with Mr. Grate talking about and admitting to a lot of the crimes here. Pretty unbelievable to listen to. I'm here joined right now by defense attorney Richard Tendler. Richard, I'm not sure if you're able to hear this, but it's pretty unbelievable to hear what he's admitting to.
This was a very skillful detective walking him through all of the elements needed to prove kidnapping, rape, everything that they needed to make out a case against him. He carefully walked him through it and let Shawn Grate basically admit to everything. In the defendant's own words, pretty devastating testimony.
Pretty devastating testimony is one way to say it. It is. It's going to be hard for those two men sitting on opposite side of him to argue this away. Let's go back in. They're talking about the sexual acts that he forced, allegedly forced Jane Doe to perform on him. Welcome back, everybody. They're going to a morning break right there, in the Shawn Grate case. You've heard his police interview. That's what we're hearing this morning. And, man, does that not look good for the defendant right there. Again, I'm joined via Skype by defense attorney Richard Tendler. Richard, what are the ways that a defense attorney can argue away a confession in a police interview?
They're going to have to, it's going to be a sympathy type of matter here.
So it's not like police coercion, the questions that were put forward were pressuring my client to give a false confession, nothing like that.
I mean, I think they're going to have to draw out where he was being questioned exactly, the exact surroundings as to where he was, what the environment was like in there. That probably doesn't go too far. This was a very good detective who walked him through all of the elements needed for every crime. That detective knew what he needed to prove, knew what he needed to get the defendant to admit to, and has gotten the defendant to admit to these things. So at this point now, I think the only way you can spin it if you're the defense is simply by saying to the jury, look, he admitted it, he voluntarily told everybody what it was that he did, he cooperated with law enforcement. This is not somebody who needs to be put to death mainly for that reason. Wasn't trying to be somebody to get away with this horrific act. He clearly admitted to all of it. Hopefully, maybe there's some mitigation there, and that gets some mileage for them. But definitely, this is devastating. You kind of sit there as a defense attorney wanting this part of the trial to just get over with as quickly as possible.
Yeah, we'll get back into that in a second. I'm looking at the live feed right now, and I'm watching Shawn Grate. I wonder if we could pull it up if we still have it. It's just a shot of him right now afterwards, and what's interesting to see, he's stretching, he's kind of relaxing. I mean, he was just on tape admitting to horrific things, and he heard the testimony from Jane Doe yesterday. And he heard the testimony from the nurse from yesterday talking about Jane Doe's injuries. If a jury's looking at him, and it kind of looks like, I'm okay, I don't really take this so seriously. I mean, look at that. Does that look like a guy who's remorseful for what he did?
No, now, in all fairness to him, he's darned if he does and darned if he doesn't. So if he starts crying, if he looks distraught, you have the potential of jurors saying that he's putting on a show for us. If he doesn't do anything, then there's the potential that he looks cold and as if he doesn't care about this. But you're right, Jesse. What's going on here? Those jurors, there is no doubt that while they're listening to this testimony, they are watching him, and they are watching what he does. So he doesn't exactly look sympathetic. He looks like a pretty hardened criminal.
Yeah, that's probably what many people are looking at him as. What we want to do right now, Richard, stand by, is I want to play some of that 911 phone call from Jane Doe. Remember, this call unwrapped the whole case. The police went to that covert house to find Mr. Grate, to arrest him, and to rescue Jane Doe. And when they were there, they found those two decomposed bodies. Really horrific to hear the details of that. So I want to play that 911 phone call for you right now.
911, what is the address to your emergency?
4th Street, Laundromat.
What's the problem?
I've been abducted.
Who abducted you?
Shawn Grate.
Where's she at now?
Asleep.
Where's she sleeping at?
In the bedroom. Please hurry.
Does he have a weapon?
He's got a taser.
Are you tied up now?
Yeah, but I kind of freed myself. Are they on the way?
Yeah, we have officers we're sending.
Please send them up.
Hey, if you're worried you don't have to talk, you can just set the phone down, okay? I just need to hear if the officers find you or not.
Oh shit, I woke him up.
You just set the phone down. Okay, can you get to the door where you can see out? Huh? Can you get out of the house?
Locked.
It's locked. Are you at the door?
Yeah, I am.
She's at the door.
Come on, hurry up, get out here. Where is he?
Bedroom sleeping.
Still sleeping?
Yeah.
Okay, they have her.
He went on armed.
He's unarmed?
Yeah.
All right. Right now. Do it. Don't do that.
No matter how many times I hear that 911 phone call, it still is chilling as the first time you hear it. I want to bring back in Richard Tendler. Richard, we were talking earlier about the police interview that Grate was giving, that the jury was hearing. They heard the 911 phone call. Now they hear Mr. Grate on tape admitting to a lot of these crimes. And we talked about the fine line between what are really good police tactics and what is police coercion, police pressure. As you know, our very own Aaron Keller covered the Making the Murderer case, the Stephen Avery case, from every single detail of it. And a big issue of that case was the confession of one of the people, was it voluntary or was it not? So what is the line there? If you could help break it down for our viewers, what is that line between proper interrogation technique and going a little bit towards pressuring the suspect and trying to get the answers that you want?
Well, you see it in the questions, particularly initially when they first start to question. And that's where you can tell by the questions that are asked that they're actually putting words in the defendant's mouth. You also want to look at what was said, if anything, before the interview started being recorded. So oftentimes, much of that happens before the actual interview takes place, and they've already told the defendant what to say. But nonetheless,
so when telling somebody, listen, just be honest, we'll help you out. Because again, when we go back to the Making the Murderer of Brendan Dassey, that was a big question. The truth will set you free. What is the difference between, do you see something here where they're like, look, just be honest, it'll help you? Is that is that being a misconception? Is that kind of creating a doubt in their mind? Is that saying something to them that you're kind of twisting the facts a little bit about what'll actually happen?
No, that on its face is fine, and that's the appropriate way to do it. But then, there's always two sides to a story. So once, I've had those situations before, and then you start asking your client questions. Well, what did they tell you before? Well, they told me that, they lied to me. They told me that they had all this evidence that they really didn't have. And so you start getting that information out. So on its face, Jesse, you're fine with that. But if there's more to it, which sometimes there is, then you start drawing out facts that, definitely look towards it being coercion. In this case situation here, it appears that this cop really, was walking him through everything, being patient with him. Initially, at first, the detective was asking him, wasn't really saying the word rape and was saying the word sex. Did you have sex with her? If I'm a defense attorney, maybe I start questioning him on that, saying, well, you didn't say it was a rape initially, did you?
Right. You didn't say it was a crime, but
up to get him to talk to those things, and then you started, as the questions went on, when the detective said, "Hey, you had sex," well, what do you call that? And then, unfortunately, the defendant said, "Well, I call that rape." Huh. So, yeah, the detective was pretty smart about that.
I know. He said he forced her. He said it himself. I mean, can you get a more clear-cut case? Again, we keep talking about his demeanor. You see him laughing in the courtroom. Now, the jury's not there. But look, our viewers are watching. I'm watching. You're watching. We're seeing a guy who's on trial. He faces a 23-count indictment right here. You're expecting to see something a little bit more stoic or sympathetic, but I'm not seeing it. We're going to talk more about this again. Richard, stand by. I want to play some more of the testimony from the surviving victim from yesterday. Again, this is Jane Doe. She testified in front of everybody yesterday. Let's listen in. Welcome back, everybody. We're covering the Shawn Grate case out of Ohio. We're waiting for a live feed back in the courtroom. When we last left, we were listening to the police interrogation tape with Mr. Grate, and it was pretty damning, for lack of a better word. I'm joined again by defense attorney Richard Tendler. Richard, we were just listening in replay about Jane Doe. Jane Doe was testifying yesterday about what she suffered. Now, how does this witness get prepared to testify? Because it's a very sensitive witness. You're talking about someone who endured a lot. And how are they prepared to speak about this in front of a jury?
Well, if you're a good prosecutor, you start early on, and you don't just you prepare her early on and not the week before trial. You don't start at that point. You start months in advance, and you walk her through the testimony, and you tell her, he even practiced potentially cross-examination on her. But basically,
that's tough. That's tough.
It is, but if you're a good prosecutor, you plan it. So that this witness is not surprised when she gets up there. That's what you want as a prosecutor. But I don't think it took much to get her prepared. At least it doesn't appear that way. Whatever they've done a good job on, because she's done a very good job up there.
Well, what I find really compelling is the fact that, as she was talking about when she first met Mr. Grate, she was calm, cool, collected. As soon as she got into when things turned sour, she broke down. And no matter how many times you prepare, there's really no way to stop that from happening.
No, and not that, we want to act here or anything like that, but that's what you want. If you're the prosecutor, you want your witness to break down. That's riveting. That's powerful.
It really is. It's so powerful. It's so powerful to listen to, and we heard it all yesterday. Now we're going to continue listening to the police interrogation tape. This is what the jury is hearing right now. We have a live feed. Let's go live. You're watching a live feed right there in the Shawn Grate case out of Ohio. You're listening to the police interrogation tape from him, and he's admitting to a lot of things on tape, and it appears the conversation just shifted. Do you know about the disappearance of anybody else? So I want to bring in back Richard Tendler. Richard, how does this work? If a defendant, a suspect, someone knows about where bodies are buried, literally where the bodies are buried, how does that work in terms of negotiating that?
Well, I mean, you want to use it to see if you can use it to your advantage to see if you get some leeway on a type of plea. So if I'm the defense attorney on it, I would tell the prosecutors, we can cooperate with you and tell you where these other bodies are buried, but we want something back in return for that.
Isn't that amazing? A lot of people don't know that little caveat in the law.
It is, and it sounds kind of sadistic, and people end up hating defense attorneys. How could you do that? And but that's your job. I mean, in these types of cases, you're trying to save your client's life, and that may be it.
It's definitely. I remember the first time I heard about that in law school, and I had to read it over again just to make sure I read that right. Okay, so we're going to go back into the courtroom. Let's listen in live. That was a good tidbit right there with Captain David Lay. I want to bring in our guest via Skype right now, Richard Tendler. Richard, that back and forth between the defense attorney and the prosecution about, was Mr. Grate entirely truthful? Was he giving free and voluntary answers? What did you make of that?
Well, I'm not sure, and I hate to second guess the defense attorney here, but I'm not sure where this defense attorney went with it. Initially, he started out by asking for the voluntary aspect of this, which was fine. And I think he probably needed to draw that out a lot more than 2 questions on that. Yeah. And then he opened the door to potentially the deceptiveness on the part of his client. And frankly, I would have objected to the prosecutor asking whether he was deceptive or not. That's not for that witness to make that determination. So there's other ways to.
But isn't, I mean, he was in the, interviewing him. He's not the one who should be answering those questions?
Well, I mean, I think a better way, if I'm the defense attorney, I object to it, saying it calls for speculation as to whether he was deceptive or not. But I would say, the question should have been, well, he told you this at this point, and then he told you that at that point, and that's it.
And before we get
the left with, basically, he's deceptive.
Right. Before we get the next witness on, I know we don't have much time. The fact that he was sobbing, does that play any role for the jury here?
Absolutely. And I was surprised that the defense attorney didn't go off on that a lot more. I thought it was good that he brought that out, but that needed to be certainly brought out more than just simply one question.
All right. Well, we'll have to see. There's a lot at stake here. Let's listen, and we have a new witness. That was a good tidbit right there with Captain David Lay. I want to bring in our guest via Skype right now, Richard Tendler. Richard, that back and forth between the defense attorney and the prosecution about, was Mr. Grate entirely truthful? Was he giving free and voluntary answers? What did you make of that?
Well, I'm not sure, and I hate to second guess the defense attorney here, but I'm not sure where this defense attorney went with it. Initially, he started out by asking for the voluntary aspect of this, which was fine. And I think he probably needed to draw that out a lot more than 2 questions on that.
Yeah.
And then he opened the door to potentially the deceptiveness on the part of his client. And frankly, I would have objected to the prosecutor asking whether he was deceptive or not. That's not for that witness to make that determination. So there's other ways that.
But he was in the interviewing him. He's not the one who should be answering those questions.
Well, I think a better way, if I'm the defense attorney, I object to it, saying it calls for speculation as to whether he was deceptive or not. But I would say, the question should have been, well, he told you this at this point, and then he told you that at that point, and that's it.
And before we get
he's left with basically he's deceptive.
Right. Before we get the next witness on, I know we don't have much time. The fact that he was sobbing, does that play any role for the jury here?
Absolutely. And I was surprised that the defense attorney didn't go off on that a lot more. I thought it was good that he brought that out, but that needed to be certainly brought out more than just simply one question.
All right. Well, we'll have to see. There's a lot at stake here. Let's listen, and we have a new witness. As they prepare to play the next tape today, I want to bring in again Richard Tendler. Richard, if he's actually a serial killer, what's his MO here? Is he going after women that need help? I'm still confused.
Yeah. He's going after women who, where he knows he can take advantage of them, and they get a thrill out of this. So clearly the type of women that he's picked out are people who are in dire health, who are desperate, that sort of thing.
The MO is always interesting to see for a serial killer, or I should say here an alleged serial killer, trying to understand what's going on in their mind. I guess it's a power dynamic thing.
Absolutely. The way, that victim described, the way she was tied up, the way she was kept there, the way he forced sex on her. He wanted her to refuse him.
Yeah, one of the victims had like you said, was Jane Doe, who was very religious. He befriended her, was like a big brother. The other one was somebody that had a lot of different issues, different mental, psychological issues. And then the other person was somebody who had a flat tire and needed his help. It's so bizarre, but interesting to follow nonetheless.
Absolutely. This is somebody who's intelligent, this defendant, preys on these individuals and knows he can take advantage of them and likes the fact that he can take advantage of them. That's probably more than half of what's going on here. Not just, getting pleasure out of killing this person and doing all sorts of things to them, but also the fact that they don't, that he can take advantage and physical advantage of them and mentally also.
Is there a sense of pride?
Oh, absolutely. I think they have them as kind of like trophies. And that's why, this would not have stopped had that brave Jane Doe who took the stand not been able to catch him. This would have gone on, and who knows how many others that are out there. Apparently there's 5, but there may be more.
There was a key word you said, trophies. I gotta ask you this question, as disturbing as it is, why he would have kept 2 bodies in the house and not disposed of them. Is that, and again, we're speculating here, but is that a sign of a trophy kill?
It might be. It just might be not, keeping them around, and in his own sadistic manner. They're there to remind him of what he did, and it's hard to say, but yeah, it just goes right along those lines.
Hard to make sense of any of this, and I don't know if I really want to make sense of all of this, but what we can do is go live into court, because now this new recording, this new interrogation is being played. Let's listen in live. Welcome back, everybody. You're watching a live feed into the Shawn Grate case. You're listening to that audio recording of the interview that was conducted by Detective Kim Major with Shawn Grate. It's a little hard to hear, but you can pick up some of the main big points. I want to provide a very special thank you to our guest for this entire morning. So kind of him to stay with us this entire morning, Richard Tendler. Richard, thank you so much for coming on, and your analysis was on point.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Jesse.
Nice to meet you as well. All right, everybody. So we are going to go back into the courtroom. I will be signing off. Caroline Polisi will be signing in, and she has a very special guest with her, Vincent Hill. So stay tuned. We're going back into the courtroom.